Hi, I'm Greg. If you're interested in catastrophism, ancient history, and the idea that not everything we know is entirely accurate, there are a few books you should probably know about. Now, I'm not necessarily saying these books are things you should own or read, as you may find them dry and dull, or there's only a few things in there that you actually care about. My goal here is to make you at least aware of them, in case you might find them interesting enough to read, but also because they're somehow important in their own right as they relate to catastrophism, and your knowledge of them may serve you at some point in the future. So if you follow alternative history and out there you hear of one of these titles, you'll at least have a frame of reference regarding it. As these are older books, many of them are freely available for electronic download on the internet from places like Project Gutenberg or the Internet Archive at archive.org. Or if you prefer the feel of paper to delve into a book's mysterious pages, there's always Amazon, because, Jeff Bezos can always use a bigger yacht. Now, I'm going to be brutally honest in what I think of these books, so don't be expecting me to be singing their praises. Many of these are not page turners. If you want one of those, pick up a good James Rollins novel. Rather, these books are somehow important to either knowledge that we are losing or some new idea that came along from somewhere else. If you hear of a new idea, chances are the person you heard it from another source originally, and one of these books may have had something to do with it. So let's get into the first book. Atlantis, the Antediluvian World by Senator Ignatius Donnelly, originally published way back in 1882. It is a classic and a must-have if you're into the possibility of Atlantis. Now you may say, wait, it's so old. Surely there's something newer with better evidence, something more modern. But remember, languages get lost, landmarks get erased, and things vanish from history. So it's good to delve into the past for an old book on this. And don't call me Shirley. To me, the best part about this book is the translation of Plato's description of Atlantis at the very beginning. Donnelly then goes on to discuss the possibility and probability of the myth being real, then spends the rest of the book discussing what he determines to be evidence. He has several chapters reviewing the various deluge legends and the universality of flood myths from the world's various peoples and cultures, and spends the remainder of the book detailing the perceived similarities between various places and cultures with the idea that they were all sourced or somehow tied to the mother continent of Atlantis. Donnelly will compare mythologies, styles of architecture, inventions, etc. The connections he details range all the way from intriguing to stretching it a bit. As you might expect, the more convincing ones are at the beginning. Bottom line, if you're into or intrigued by Atlantis, you should have this book. The Morning of the Magicians by Louis Paul Wells and Jacques Bergier. A gift from my neighbor. The topic of this book is the occult, paranormalism, and alchemy. To me, the title indicates the two authors believe these topics they discuss in the book and that they aren't entirely fantasy, and there will be a dawning of interest in them, resulting in new practitioners. Hence, The Morning of the Magicians. As it was published first in 1960, they may not have met with the success they had hoped for. As they state in the beginning of the book, you can skip around, reading whatever chapters might interest you first and saving the others for later, or you can read it straight through. Skipping around might be advisable, as the first time I tried to read this, I just couldn't get into it. I found some of the chapters were difficult to plow through, while others were riveting, so I did make it through on my second attempt. Why do I call out this book? Rabbit holes. This book led me to delve into so many things I have never heard of and got me into at least 4 other books. Many times reading its pages I thought, that's cool, and made a mental note to learn more. So many interesting topics like, nope, I'm not going to tell you. You'll just have to read the book. Next on the list is Earth in Upheaval by Emanuel Velikovsky. I bought this along with another book of his, Worlds in Collision. To me, Earth in Upheaval was far and away the more palatable of the two. I'm sorry, but I'm not quite ready to accept the idea that Venus was once a rogue comet that got captured into planetary orbit. Worlds in Collision, the book I don't want to talk about but am, focuses on native or traditional stories of cosmic catastrophes. On the few I cross-referenced, I found he takes these stories way out of context solely to support his ideas. I want to point out I am not in any way dismissing the importance of ancient stories. I think they are entirely relevant. I'm just not on board with Velikovsky's conclusions about them. Okay, back to Earth in Upheaval, the book I want to discuss. This one points out actual physical evidence of catastrophes and sudden climactic changes and lets us know, yeah, we've had some very bad days in the past where the shit really hit the fan. From flash-frozen mammoths to piles of bones to changing shorelines to a city's sudden change in altitude, this book is chock full of bad memories and assures you that the siren song of uniformitarianism ignores a huge part of our planet's history. This is also a very readable book. I didn't find it a chore to go through page after page. So if you're a catastrophist like me, this is a book full of things you'll want to know about, if you don't already. Hamlet's Mill by Giorgio di Santillana and Hertha von der Schand, published in 1969. I first heard of this book from the great Graham Hancock, and not just once but on several occasions, which sparked my interest in it. If I admire him and he admires it, well, this just might be worthy of my time. I've also heard other incredibly learned people, such as Randall Carlson, refer to it, thus cementing my interest. So what is it? This is a book about folklore and myth, tying them to precession of the equinoxes. If you don't know what precession of the equinoxes is, it's the fact that the entire celestial sphere rotates around us ever so slowly. So slowly, in fact, that half a cycle from now, winter constellations will be summer constellations and vice versa. The entire cycle, often referred to as the Great Year, takes 25,920 years to complete. Now, if it takes this incredibly long time for just one turn, how did the ancients know about it? That's what this book delves into, or claims to. I only picked up on a couple of snippets about that here and there. This is a tough one to read. Fortunately, the last 22% is appendices, so I was going to skip them, except I never made it to the end either time I tried to read it. Each of the authors has their own writing style. I found one of them to have the habit of rambling on, and it was an exercise to herd the mental cats of his thought process. The other author seems to be much more focused on using big words and phrases to impress us with his vast intellect, rather than getting his actual point across. The easiest parts to read were those that were extensive quotes from other works. Like I said, I've had 2 attempts at reading this and only got most of the way through once. That being said, I do want to have another go at it. I think this book would be much more palatable if someone went through and edited the entire book, giving it a much better flow. That being said, it's not going to be me, and I'm not holding out hope for someone doing it anytime soon. Any volunteers? Anyone? Here we have 2 books and not just one. Now, when something doesn't make sense, you have to come up with a theory to explain it. For instance, during the Ice Age, why were there massive ice sheets over Canada but not over Siberia? On the Peary-Reese map, why is there what appears to be a pole in the middle of the Atlantic? One idea is that the Earth's crust actually slips over the inner layers from time to time and repositions itself. So was the North Pole once located in Hudson Bay? Where else has it been? Enter the Earth crust displacement theory that Charles Hapgood puts forth in these 2 books, Earth's Shifting Crust and Path of the Pole. To be clear, this is a theory on the movement of the geographic pole rather than a movement of the magnetic pole, which is scientific fact. Now, I'm not sold on this theory myself, mainly because if it were true, there should be a pattern of megalithic alignments that only makes sense if the pole were someplace else. To my knowledge, we have no evidence of this. But the theory is both scary and intriguing. And to give this theory just a little more credibility, the books have a foreword by Albert Einstein, so he has some credible backing. Of all the books I present here, these are the two easiest to read and to get into. Furthermore, you can download them both for free. If you decide to give them a shot, start with Earth's shifting crust. The Popol Vuh. This is considered a sacred text that traces the ancient history of the Mayan people. It caught my attention as it is referenced on occasion by Graham Hancock. Toward the beginning, it relates the multiple attempts the gods made at creating a human race before getting results that actually pleased them. Then it focuses on the adventures of the twins Hunahpu and Xbalanque. Yes, there are more sections, but these are the two most important. It was originally written in the Quiche Mayan language in the 1550s to preserve the Mayan history, mythology, and cultural identity, while the Spanish conquistadors were doing their best to eliminate it. There are a few translations of this work. I've read 3 of them. First, the Getz Morley translation, done in 1950, then the Dennis Tedlock translation, done in 1985 and updated in 96, and finally the Alan Christensen translation, done in 2004 and updated in 2007. Which one do I recommend? Well, actually all of them. The Tedlock translation often uses translated names like Seven Death and Pus Demon, whereas the Getz Morley translation sticks with the original Quiche Maya names like Vukobkame and Ahopa. This gives you insight into the names by looking at side-by-side translations. Meanwhile, the Christensen translation is by far the most annotated, with some pages having more commentary than actual text. I found some biblical parallels, like a story that reminded me of the Tower of Babel, and another that reminded me of Daniel in the lion's den, making me somewhat suspicious of Christian influence into these stories. Remember, this was copied down in the 1550s. There aren't too many characters, but I found it handy to draw out a family tree while I was reading it. If you're going to delve into this, you may consider having at least one set aside as a reference. Maybe you've heard of the great Dr. Robert Schoch, the Boston University geologist who used geological evidence to redate the initial construction of the Sphinx to thousands of years earlier than initially believed, and ruffled the feathers of many an Egyptologist in the process. While Dr. Schoch officially redated the Sphinx's construction, he never claimed the original idea was his, because it wasn't. In this case, Dr. Schoch was given the idea by the late great independent Egyptologist John Anthony West. John Anthony West, in turn, got the idea from French mystic mathematician and Egyptologist R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch. This hefty 2-volume set, The Temple of Man, was written by de Lubitsch and is his magnum opus. Now, just to be clear, the idea of a much older Sphinx came from one of de Lubitsch's other books, Sacred Science. In fact, here's a screen grab of John Anthony West from the Mystery of the Sphinx video, and you can see that book, Sacred Science, open on his desk, circled in green. But let's get back to the Temple of Man. This is a massive 1,088-page work about the Luxor Temple, which is on the east bank of the Nile River in Luxor. Originally written in French when it was published in 1949, it was translated into English in 1977. This should not be confused with The Temple in Man by the same author, which is another book altogether. Not too confusing there. Let's try and vary our book titles by more than a preposition, shall we? I called the book out as noteworthy for a couple of reasons. First, it offers a unique view of ancient Egyptians. They think of things from a slightly different perspective than we do today, and it comes through in the book, and it is interesting to see and appreciate that. Now, it doesn't just focus on the Luxor temple itself. It has several parts, so I'll break them down. First, there are plenty of introductions and forwards and prefaces and the like to get through, if you choose. The first several chapters are purely philosophical ramblings. I'll give you an example from a random paragraph. The philosophy of number is based on the functional character of number. This character defines the functional possibilities whose application gives rise to our ideas. We do not attribute the notion of division of the number 2. It is the number 2 that implies the dualizing function from which our notion of division derives. Counting is not a faculty reserved to man. It is the first innate form of consciousness. Thus, the elective affinity of the chemical module and its valence is already an innate consciousness of number. Now, if that sort of thing is your cup of tea, you've got 70 pages of it to enjoy. Personally, I skipped through a lot of this. But now it starts to pick up and get interesting. There is a shift to mathematical thought, which is a combination of philosophy and math, before it focuses on the pharaonic approach to math and geometry. This section is actually pretty intriguing, and I plan on going back to read it more at some point in the future. The screenshot you see happens to be turned to that section. Toward the end of the first volume, it begins another transitional section blending math, geometry, and the fine art of building an ancient Egyptian temple, until you get to the second volume, which pretty much focuses exclusively on the Luxor temple itself. There's also a ton of pictures in the second volume, so after plowing your way through the first volume, the second is a breeze. I would recommend being really interested in this stuff before shelling out the nearly $200 for this hardcover 2-volume set. So for someone interested in alternative ancient history, those are just a few of the books to be aware of, and maybe even consider reading. Of course there are others. Let me know in the comments if one I didn't mention comes to your mind. I can always do a follow-up video with more in the future. I hope this has piqued your interest in a few of them, and you'll look into them some more. Bye for now.